This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the minds of business and technology leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
How do you balance the reality of managing legacy systems and the technical debt against the board's expectation that you will deliver on strategic security initiatives?
How do you create a strong, security-minded environment without it tipping over into a counterproductive culture of fear?
What do CISOs who've been part or been involved in those serious incidents know about leadership in a crisis? How is their approach different to somebody who's never been face-to-face with a serious cyber incident?
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences and insights at edsxevents.com. Technology doesn't stand still, whether it's AI reshaping the enterprise, cyber threats evolving overnight, or cloud strategies being rewritten in real time. CIOs, CTOs and CISOs are navigating more change more quickly than ever before. So, in this special season finale episode of CXO Secrets, we're doing something a little bit different. We've invited 3 former guests from across our first 3 seasons back onto the show to chat with them about what's changed, about what new challenges their roles are throwing at them, and about how they're planning for what comes next. And as always on CXO Secrets, they'll be passing a question to one another too. So, let's meet once again our first guest from all the way back in Season 1. Anaïs Beaucousin, CBSO at ADP International. Thank you for coming back to join us again on CXO Secrets.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be back, and thanks for having me again.
So it's been, I would say, just over a year since we last caught up here on the podcast. Tell me, what's been the big thing where you are since we last spoke?
Well, last year, the focus of my team was, I shared with you, BCPs and resiliency, mitigating all risks, including geopolitical risk management, and of course, supporting sales and clients. I would say our overall focus has not changed. We are still working really hard to support the organization effectively and sustainably. But what has changed, though, is the context that we are operating in. Over the past 12 months, we've seen a rise in large-scale cyber attacks and a more unstable geopolitical environment, as well as the rapid acceleration of AI. All of that really increases uncertainty. And in that kind of environment, it becomes even more important to apply the highest level of controls to the things that we can actually control. And one of those things, and one of these areas is third-party security. Modern organizations really depends on complex ecosystems of vendors and partners. And regulators and clients now expect companies like us to understand not only their own security posture, but also the security of those they work with. So that means understanding how vendors handle data, asking the right security questions, and applying consistent standards across the supply chain. So many security incidents, they don't happen because of the company's own controls, and because, those have failed, but really because the partners' controls were weaker. So this is a blind spot that organizations everywhere, and including us, we can no longer afford.
It's been, if 2025 teaches us anything, and it should come as no surprise really, it is that the supply chain is one of the big vulnerabilities. And there have been any number of, we don't even need to mention the names of the companies, the names of the organizations, but high profile names in the UK market where we're based that have had global implications. And it's been third parties, it's been part of the supply chain that has been targeted and ultimately enabled the bad actors to gain access to the headline company name. And it's a real challenge, though, isn't it? Because you can control what you can control within your own organization, or feel as though you can control what's in your own organization. But it's a real challenge when you're also trying to apply the same standards that you would have under your own roof to all of your suppliers. And you mentioned it there, Anaïs. It's complicated. We have more and more digital suppliers. If you're manufacturing stuff, you've got physical suppliers as well. It's a real challenge. So how do you begin to try and get a grip on that third-party risk management piece?
Well, the thing is that you need to have a program. I think most large companies, they do. We do as well at ADP. So yes, you set up your program. Our program is actually many years old, I would say, since our security organization has been set up, and you just make it better and better every year. And I think this year, with this context that we are in, and it's really important that we raise the bar and that we ensure that, yes, all the partners that we're working with, all the vendors, they apply the same security controls and concerns and high standards that we are looking for. So being organized with, a solid program that everybody knows, and that before engaging even with a partner or a vendor, they know about. They, sign the contract, and they know that this is our expectations, very clear in advance that this is what we expect. And actually, you choose as well who you work with depending on that program. So if a company doesn't have the right security controls, then you choose not to work with them. That's the rule.
Absolutely. And the phrase that you mentioned there, Anaïs, that I think is so telling, but it's so applicable, is raising the bar. We are all having to raise the bar wherever we work, whoever we work for, because the bad actors have certainly been raising their bar using the AI tools that are available to us all now. They're raising their game. We need to do the same. So 2026, that year of really understanding and managing third-party risk for you. Thank you for sharing that, and I wish you all the very best with that 2026 mission. As always, we have a question for you here on the show that's been posed by another guest. And, well, this question comes from Martin Covill, who is CISO at IPSL. And he asks this question.
Yeah, so obviously throughout the last 12 months, major cyber incidents have been hitting the headlines all over. It's quite a scary role to be in, to be honest. So again, lots of CISOs, unfortunately, have had to manage some of those serious incidents. And I wonder if, from a question perspective, what does CISOs who've been part or been involved in those serious incidents know about leadership in a crisis that those who potentially haven't had to experience that, how could they anticipate what kind of outcomes are going to be? Those who have dealt with it firsthand, how is their approach different to somebody who's never been face to face with a serious cyber incident?
I really love this question, and this is actually a very useful question because all companies are going through crisis. So if you haven't yet, most probably, unfortunately, there would be one coming. So I would start answering that. There are things that you can anticipate. So that's the thing, that if you have not been through a very big crisis, you will anticipate, which is around collaboration. So collaboration between your data privacy team, the legal department, client success teams. The other thing will be having the right communication internally and to our clients, a follow the sun support in place, sending people on site. The crisis might be, the center of the crisis might be in the different countries where you're sitting. Of course, motivate, praise, and reward your team. And I would say be prepared all year long and practice and exercise. So that's, what you would think about naturally. But here are
I
the
guess
things.
those are the known knowns, aren't they? They're the
That's
things
right.
that you do know that you're going to need to deal with. But that's when it starts to get a little bit more interesting, when it's those unknown unknowns and unknown knowns.
That's right. And I think, this is really what we learn, and the few things that I have learned when after dealing a large crisis. So the first thing is that most of the time at the start of the crisis, the information will be wrong or will be incomplete.
Yeah.
And maybe it will be also emotionally charged. And as a leader, still, you have to act. You have to make decisions. So leadership really becomes about direction under ambiguity and not correctness. This is not easy to do. It's, we like information to be correct so that we are sure we're making the right decision. So this is what you have to learn: leadership under ambiguity and direction under ambiguity. The second thing is, in a crisis, you have to stay calm. This is actually, to me, this is one of the most important things. You have to stay calm under pressure, because we know that panic spreads faster than a malware, and that can be very detrimental. So being composed, reassuring the team with, we're handling this, it's going to be fine, really stabilizes the team and help them focus on what they need to do and the action that they need to do the right thing. The third thing I would say is serious incidents aren't just one big decision. It's actually a series of hundreds micro decisions. Should I shut it down or keep it running? Should I notify now or wait? Should I escalate or contain? Should I trust the vendor or verify? Well, in that one, I would say always verify. But,
Yes.
you have to accept that some decisions will be the least bad, but not necessarily good. That's also something, challenging to do. And then the other thing is that the leader really becomes the emotional container. So you need to absorb the fear without reflecting it back. You need to protect exhausted teams, because, a big crisis is just not one day. Actually, most of the time, it could be weeks and weeks. So you have to protect, your team from exhaustion. And then I would say you have to take the heap upwards so that the work can continue downwards. So to conclude, to me, leadership under a big crisis is about holding ambiguity, creating psychological safety under fire, and also making imperfect decisions at the right tempo.
That is such strong advice. And as per the terrific question, some of those things would only occur to you once you've been through the experience once or twice. I just want to, I guess, layer one more thing onto that, if I may, and it's what happens after the event, because it strikes me that decision-making, clarity, supporting the team, all of the things that you speak so eloquently about there while the crisis is going on, that's clearly very important. But it's also how we respond to a crisis afterwards. So I guess you would also advocate for, once you've got past whatever the issue is, actually coming together, reviewing the decisions that were made, reviewing the response, understanding what happened, and then refining whatever plan that you have so that next time you can respond even better. Something along those lines?
Yes, absolutely. So, and it is actually a very important point, because during the crisis, there is no time for lessons learned. But it's very important that when the crisis, I would say, is contained, and after a while, like you said, you really take the time to do the lessons learned. It's not only the root cause analysis and those things, very important. It definitely has to be done. But it's a combination of, what did work well and what could have we done better, and, taking the time to reflect on those things, but also documenting it. and sharing about it as well, so that, not only the team working on it knows about it, but everybody that could be impacted knows about it as well. So to me, it's awareness throughout the company.
And the psychological safety during the incident is one thing, but actually in that wash up, in that lessons learnt afterwards, because of the decisions that are being made in the moment, the least bad decisions, hopefully, not always the best ones, but that's what happens. Actually having an element of that psychological safety in the review so that people don't feel as though they're having fingers pointed at them for decisions they were making in the moment. That also feels as though it's very important that people can be honest, people can share, and that the right lessons learned can be carried forward should another incident happen. Anaïs, I know you have a question to ask another guest on the show, and we'll hear that later on. But for now, great to chat as always, and thank you for joining us once again on CXO Secrets.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hammond Reddie, CISO at Spire Healthcare. Good to see you again.
Afternoon, David. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Very well. It's been a few months since we spoke, I guess now. How are you? What's been going on for you since we last caught up?
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a few months. It feels like a few days. I think that's the world that we live in now. Everything seems to whiz past, be it through us being slightly old or for the world moving at the pace it moves, I guess. But, what's been going on? I thought it was quite keen to sort of chat about something that completely curveballed me and maybe a few companies in the last few weeks. Something quite new to us in respect of how we've dealt with a problem. So I thought I'd sort of cover that off first. But a couple of weeks ago, late night conversation with the National Crime Agency, putting us towards a potential data breach that had occurred for Spire. So everything coming together late in the evening. What do we do? Do we get the teams together? The investigations, all that sort of good stuff, and looking to run the playbooks. But then realizing the entire thing was a hoax, and realizing there were 90 other companies that were also involved in the hoax. And I suppose the thing I was going to sort of talk about was this scenario, which evolved over a period of days into what you could playfully call panic as a service. So, a brand new nefarious actor that had decided to basically state a claim that they had breached and stolen a load of data. And then suddenly we're in a 2-week scramble to manage the narrative. So, a really interesting scenario that we didn't really have a sort of initial playbook for. And we had to sort of learn as we went along.
I mean, this is fascinating. And obviously PaaS, we think of that as platform as a service. Panic as a service is entirely new. What was the starting point of this for you? Was it when you got a phone call or a contact from the National Crime Agency to say, we think actually you need to be made aware of something?
Yeah, and I suppose the first things first was it the NCA? So first of all, you've got to establish that you are talking to the right people and go through the right paths to make sure that you are talking to somebody that is a genuine officer from the NCA. And then it's a matter of obviously, first of all, understanding, have we been breached? And have this actually happened? And that was quite easy to ascertain the basics, look at your telemetry, understand if there's, has everything been running perfectly for the last 3 weeks, or for the last 6 months, let's be honest. Once that's proved let's start actually having a look at what's actually out there, what's being put out there on the dark web, what's being shared. And then start to realize within a few hours that there are many companies that have been mentioned on there and many fake names, and no genuine, easy way of suddenly saying that's not real. And I suppose it immediately becomes a communication system, to understand how do we manage that narrative, because they haven't necessarily got a foothold in our network. But they've got a foothold in the headlines, right? Because they've got the control, because they're managing the narrative in the news. They're making a point enough that the NCA noticed, and now we're having to prove a negative. So it was a very interesting situation to be in.
So in terms of your information gathering, when you're first made aware that there may have been a breach of some sort, when you're trying to establish the scale and scope of that, is that something you have internal capability to do, or are you working with third parties here in order to establish the potential spread of data?
internal teams, external SOC, forensics teams that we can invoke. Lots of people can come to the party to come together to prove it. But when you start to look at, you start to realize that it's all a hoax, and then it's a theatre production, and it's managing that narrative, understanding that there's a communication strategy that needs to click in, and they don't need anything technical. They don't need malware. They just need marketing. So essentially they're telling the world that something's happened, and you're essentially trying to prove that it hasn't. And so, analyzing this situation, completing it, dealing with it, and moving on, what happens next time? And then starting to think bigger is are we now entering a world where even if it is just a headline, we can have one communication narrative strategy, but then when people start to synthesize data that looks like it could be your data, because you could do this in 10 minutes with anything, with ChatGPT, with Gemini, and then suddenly they've got more evidence that it's occurred. And how do you manage that? How do you prove something that looks to the layman like it's genuine? How do you get ahead of that? How do you actually start to make sure that all of the panic, which you cannot put your arms around quick enough, is being managed appropriately?
So what do you know about the motivation here? Because obviously when we talk about bad actors and their actions, they're trying to get at your data, perhaps. They're trying to leverage that in order to get some money out of you, ransomware or whatever, or something else. What do you think you know about what this group of bad actors or a bad actor was trying to do just with the panic element here?
It was asked of me yesterday when I was in the office, is that what's the point? Why would someone that much effort into it? But if you start to look at that fear of being in the news for the wrong reasons, just having that element of control over a company and creating that fear and that panic, and for, let's say they decide to contact you, because they didn't in this circumstance, and they're very new, and in fairness, they went live again yesterday with a different set of people on there. So there's another group of companies doing exactly what we had to do a couple of weeks ago. Is it about creating enough fear that someone will pay to have that potential concept of a breach being put on the dark web? Is that enough to say, we're not going to steal your data, we're not going to exfiltrate you, we're not going to ransomware you, we're just going to say we've got enough information online to make it look like it's happened, we've got enough synthesized data to look like we could cause or control the narrative, so give us X 100K, not the big 20 millions for your ransomwares, but just enough money to keep us going, and we won't put your name up there. And then we move on to the next company and the next company. So there's conversations happening about that. Is it just the threat of something happening? I mean, it happens in the real world, unfortunately, with just, I say normal crime, but non-cyber crime, where people are threatened into not having something happen, and they simply pay to make sure that it doesn't occur. And this is an option to maybe move down that line. Where's there's no technical effort. And it's very easy to set up a site on the dark web, but it's incredibly difficult to manage that narrative. So you have got to do so little effort other than just create the potential of panic that potentially people will pay to not be on that site.
I mean, that protectionism is a phrase that springs to mind there, but also it wouldn't go beyond the realms of possibility that this could be a nation state actor looking to create a sense of instability, attacking household names such as where you work at Spire and myriad other organizations, purely to create that chaos, that destabilizing effect that could enable, who knows, but that's fascinating. Final question on this, I guess, then, Hammond, because I hadn't really had a conversation with anyone who's been through this yet. You mentioned your playbooks. Obviously, you have your plans in this instance. I take it the lessons learnt from this panic attack that you have suffered, you need to build those into your systems. And I wonder what lessons you do take away from this experience that obviously you internalize, but you're talking about this publicly as well. What advice do you give to other CISOs and organizations who maybe have had a tap on the shoulder from the NCA or someone else saying, by the way, there's something you might like to know about?
Yeah, I mean, it goes down to having the right playbooks and to have them well rehearsed. No one's going to have every playbook, as we've just found, right? Not everybody's going to be anticipate what's going to occur. But there are 4 or 5, maybe 6 that will occur over time, be it something like ransomware or something like DDoS. Rehearse them continuously till it gets boring, till people can anticipate it. Because if you don't do it, and you do it maybe once a year during a cyber simulation event, or maybe you do it once every 6 months just to go back through the paperwork to make sure that you're showing some due diligence in, reviewing your playbooks to make sure the names are correct and things like that, that's fine. But the important thing is the muscle memory. And you need to go back through those playbooks. And most of the time, I think sometimes, and this is really key, it doesn't really matter how the incident is, as in it's a ransomware or DDoS or something like that. It could simply be a network outage that you cause for a bad change. It's about owning and managing major incidents and being able to rehearse that part of it. Understanding where it's run centrally, making sure the communication's there. And then all of the remediation part or the investigative part will fit into those playbooks. And sometimes at the time, that playbook might be just about right, but not perfect, because it's a slightly niche scenario. It isn't exactly a DDoS attack. It actually was a brute force attack, which caused the DDoS attack, something like that. But the concept of the major incident remains the same. Well managed, single point of communication, and the right people escalated to and outwards. So that's the key thing. Rehearse the major incidents, and then the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, and the rehearsal piece there, building up that muscle memory, if you like, is so important, because in times of stress, we don't always make the best choices, the best decisions. So the more that we're able to act almost autonomously, obviously taking into account the circumstances as they unfold around us, but the more well-rehearsed and the more muscle memory we have around a situation, the better. Hammond, that's fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing that with us and indeed the community as well, and certainly want to keep an eye out for in the future. As you know, we do a Pass the Question on this show, and we have a special question in this special show where we have 3 guests all in one episode. We have a question for you that comes from Anaïs Beaucousin from ADP International, and her question goes like this.
All right. So this is actually a question that I think is a reality in our company as well at ADP. Probably we're not the only one, but I would be curious. So this is my question. How do you balance the reality of managing legacy systems and the technical debt against the board's expectation that you will deliver on strategic security initiatives? So how do you balance the old, but this is very important, especially from a security point of view, and also the new shiny things that are important for the competitive advantage as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a CTO or a CIO or a CISO who hasn't been asked this or doesn't face this every single day. We live in a world, and specifically thinking from the CISO perspective, we live in a world where we do a lot of foundational work. It's very much stuff that doesn't get seen. It might be hardening of systems, it might be patching and vulnerability management, it might be having a conversation with somebody in a difficult way about getting rid of some tech debt. The shiny stuff will always be the most important to the business if they only focus on the outward look. The fact that we've got, and we often talk about a skyscraper, we don't want to think about the underpinning foundations, but the higher you go and the more you put onto that building, more likely it is to fall over if you haven't focused on those foundations. And I think if you need to make a change that is fundamental and will slow down the pace of the business, you have to have a really good reason for it. And I think that's when you're starting to talk about how you frame it to the board. And you have to start thinking that legacy systems shouldn't just be, sort of tarred with a bad brush. They are strategic assets, and you can modernize what matters, because there was a reason we had those maybe 10 years ago, and we still need them today because they provide a good service. So you modernize what matters, and then you retire what doesn't, because the decisions you made 10 years ago aren't necessarily what you want to achieve now, even though you're relying on that system or that technical debt. And I suppose we've got we're translators, right? We're translating technical debt into business risk, and it's the board can see and feel that. So whilst it looks like we're trying to manage an aged old system out, or we're doing something with it, we're essentially putting in foundational strength so that we can secure stability and protect our organization with its credibility. Once it's giving a great uptime, let's make sure our patient care that we provide is consistent. We don't want to hear that appointments have been cancelled because the system's gone down, or we don't want to hear that there's been any patient impact or, impact to life because of a system that's, failed. So I think it comes down to prioritization around, from my perspective, like attack surfaces. What would the potential business impact be? And that speed of value. So we're sort of almost, as we start to move things forwards, maybe we do, as I say, from countdown, 2 from the top and 1 from the bottom, right? Because whenever we're moving something forwards, we always manage to make sure we pull something alongside it as well. It might be that we're adding in new functional requirements to that system, but we're making sure that we're upgrading the underpinning operating system that sits behind it. So we're constantly dragging that tail forwards, but also making that that decision: do we still need it? Retire it when we don't. To give you a story of going back into Barclays days many, many years ago, and WannaCry, one of the biggest fundamental shifts where we had an environment that ran old Windows 2000 environments, we couldn't move it off. We couldn't move things forwards. We couldn't get off it. We were told it was going to take too long. When WannaCry hit, because it impacted that infrastructure so much so that it ended up being a conversation at an executive level, 48 hours later, on the premise that the board said, you must get this done, those Windows 2000 servers were gone. Because everybody came in to do what was told of them, and they did it because they saw the risk that was associated with it. Now, it does get a little bit James Bond at that moment, which is the fear values kicked in. You're in the news and there's WannaCry, and subsequently the quickest way of getting rid of that risk is to get rid of the assets on which it could occur. But it does prove that in certain circumstances, in certain scenarios, you can clean the decks. And I think we've had fundamental shifts if we go through history. With WannaCry was at one point, we had the Log4j only a few years ago at Christmas, and we've had COVID, which obviously has moved us more to hybrid working or to using Teams and removing the old Skype systems and things like that. So there's always been these fundamental hammer moments when things change. But you can't always wait for those, right? We can't just wait until something happens with Windows 2012 and that will give us that amazing springboard moment to get rid of it. So I think the conversations had to be happening at a board level, and it is about framing it to make sure that they understand that you can achieve greatness with some of the systems you've got if you actually take the time to look at them, retire what you don't, modernize what matters.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a high risk, the hammer moment there. It takes a high risk to get movement on another risk there. And COVID, Log4j, WannaCry, remember them all very well indeed, can be those high risk moments. Thank you. Fascinating insights, as always. Hammond, I know you've a question for our next guest, and we'll hear that later on. But for now, great to catch up. And thank you again for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thanks very much, David. It's been great to chat.
Martin Covill, CISO at IPSL. Thank you for coming back to join us again on CXO Secrets.
Thanks so much. Nice to see you again, David.
So it's been almost a year since we last spoke here on the podcast. Tell me, what's been the big thing for you since then where you are?
Yeah, so we've finished a couple of the big transformation projects. I think we just finished the one when I mentioned last year about moving to online all of our services from on-premise into public cloud. And we've had a site move since then as well. But mainly the main change within my circumstances, I've started to provide more board advisory services compared to where we last met. So supporting a tech startup company who provide secure remote access, secure virtual desktops, and know your customer services. Mm-hmm. About 6 months ago, started to become a board advisor at Arden University, helping them design their 2027 STEM curriculum with obviously focusing on the cybersecurity aspect of that. So that's really interesting and good to be part of. And just last week, secured an additional role with the founder of a startup looking at releasing a running app for women to help them provide safe running routes. Which again, very exciting. Glad to help from a security perspective, and again, presenting at lots of conferences. Obviously, met yourself at a couple of those as well.
Indeed. Do you know, it seems to be something of a recurring theme about, people who are operating at the CXO level. Of course, you would expect them to be so focused on the demands that their jobs bring, particularly in the information security space, like where you are. But at the same time, they tell me more and more that it's the things that they do outside of the 9 to 5, not that it ever is a 9 to 5, I know, but it's the complementary things that they also do that actually support the day job, and vice versa as well. And the board advisory positions there, that sounds really interesting. You mentioned, is it Arden University?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. I mean, we speak about the skills gap, we speak about nurturing new talent in the industry and about the challenges as a hiring manager, as I know you are as well. It feels as though you are going headfirst into trying to trying to find ways to bridge that skills gap right at the beginning of people's career journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Arden are doing something amazing by actually reaching out to industry leaders in various different areas of the business. So again, I'm focusing on the STEM area, but they want to make sure industry leaders, the students that are coming out of their training, be it undergraduate, postgraduate, or apprenticeship courses, all have something which industry are looking for. Looking at addressing those skills gaps and lack of potential candidates to come and fill roles. A lot of universities just focus on theoretical content, and then people find that they've got their degree, they go out to industry and say, well, where's your experience? Come back when you've got some experience. And it's it's almost that chicken and egg. They can't get the experience until they can get a position. So Arden are trying to tackle that directly by working with industry leaders, finding out what our pain points are, what we're looking for in students. So we're getting to actually shape the actual syllabus and curriculum for those relevant cybersecurity courses to help industry fill our gaps, but also increase their chances of their students securing a role outside as well. So.
And then away from education, when you are working on board advisory roles with other organisations, what are the kind of things that they're asking for your input in at the moment? Where are the gaps maybe in their knowledge that they feel they need to bring in some board advisors?
So I think a lot of founders, they've got the business idea and they want to, the primary route to market, is how do we get this product out there? And again, a lot of them don't have the experience. How can we do this securely? Or what kind of regulatory frameworks do we need to follow? What kind of privacy impact could we be having by launching this application or this service, or what's already in the market from a security perspective? Can you help advise what we should be doing? Trying to influence and make sure that they're not going to come full foul of some regulation here or there, depending on where they're going to be hosting it and what kind of controls. If it's outsourcing some services, what kind of things from a security perspective do they need to be mindful of? The due diligence that needs to go in the background. What kind of certifications do they have? Do they do application security testing, for example, rather than just creating an app and shoving it out there onto there's certain processes to get applications approved for Apple Store and Google's marketplace, things like that. So, it's just advising them from a security perspective, some of the regulatory and sort of legal areas they may not be aware of. And again, what kind of gotchas to look out from a security perspective.
And then with the running app that you mentioned there at the end as well, Martin, it's time and time again, particularly speaking with security leaders, the importance not just to focus on the digital security, but also the physical security, getting into data centers, access to the workforce as well. It sounds as though you're taking those lessons, but then applying them very much in the consumer space as well, in a really worthy area too.
No, absolutely. And it's a key sort of skill, I think, that comes with being a senior CISO level, C-level executive type role is understanding how to take technical, really technical, complicated matters in some occasions, and then explaining it in terms that, CEOs and founders will understand, because, they're not all technical and they're not all security experts. That's why they actually ask us in to help them and advise, right? If they knew it, they wouldn't need your help. So again, it's making sure that they understand it from a simple, easy to recognize. And again, more outcome based. That's what they want to get from a security perspective. What do I need to do to make sure this is secure, so I'm not going to fall foul? They don't care what technical details are behind it, but just what do they need to be aware of from their accountability and where their responsibilities lie.
It's good work that you do, Martin. Keep up all of the different interests, because it feels as though you are bringing benefits not only to the corporate positions that you work in, but to people just going out for a run and to new people who are entering the industry as well. More power to you. As always in our conversations, we have a question for you. That's not from me, but it's been passed on for one of our previous guests. Are you ready for that?
I am ready, yes, bring it on.
In which case, here goes.
As someone who takes organizational-wide security as my main responsibility, so I need all the teams that work both in my teams and in other teams to take threats seriously, but not to the point that they're anxious and afraid to act or even hesitant to report issues. So my question is, how do you create a strong security-minded environment without it tipping over into a counterproductive culture of fear?
Oh, that's a great question, and I can say I've been at different organisations where there's completely different cultures in place, and some have been better than others, shall we say, from a counterproductive fear culture to others which have fully embracing and almost gone the other way of not being strict enough potentially when they need to be. So from my personal perspective, I'm a great believer in positive reinforcement and using education to make sure our colleagues across businesses are informed but also equipped to become what is effectively our first line of defense. They're the people who are going to get the emails. We're not going to be there. Most organizations have small security teams who can't be the eyes and ears. We can't be everywhere at all times. So I think it's paramount that we help our users where we can. So I use a variety of different methods to raise awareness and change the culture. Things like newsletters, threat intelligence briefings, town hall presentations. We have workplace posters throughout the office, general security tips, helping people become more aware of what's going on. Screensavers for, that helps regardless of where people are, working from home, not seen in the office, they work great. For new starters to business, I try and find out who they are and try and introduce myself, have a CISO overview session, or following on from some of the town presentations, the town hall presentations, I make sure that people, my virtual door is always open. If they want to know more about what we do as a team or just security in general, I make sure I'm available to and regularly run those CISO sessions. And I think another key part is every person that I have within the security team, we all have 2 to 3 business partners at roughly the same level within the organization as themselves. And we hold regular meetings with those users across the business. And there's a couple of purposes for that. One of them is just to provide regular security tips, reinforce what we've sent out in the recent newsletters or just to give them a topic to help them understand a particular area. And again, it's useful because then we find out what's going on in their world. They don't all go through the same processes sometimes. Sometimes technology or software is brought in through the back door, company credit card or whatever else, whereas having somebody on the security team regularly catch up with them, they know what's going on in their world. So if it has missed, by any means missed some of the proper processes that are going where, they can help advise from a security perspective, make us aware that the business are making some changes that may not have gone through the proper governance. And again, things like that, I think it's really important to be able to have that relationship. And the most important thing from those business partnering sessions is it gives everybody in the business a friendly face within security. So they don't want to potentially reply to that corporate security email address, think of those security teams in the basement, they're all scary people. But again, having that single point of contact gives them the confidence to be able to reach out to somebody in the security team without any fear. We're not bad people. We're there just trying to help the business, manage the risk within the business. So, we are quite approachable once you get to know us. And again, I think, and I one of the key things we do as well is promoting positive reinforcement across the business. We recognize, reward, and call out who the cyber champions are. So every 6 months, so middle of the year and end of the year, we do a look at all of the phishing results, see who's spotted the most phishing attempts, by the team that run the phishing attempts every month, who spotted the most, but also who's reported the most sort of emails that are not run from as part of phishing testing, genuine emails that have come in which could potentially be malicious. So we let all colleagues, we've got a central platform called High Five where we can send out, thanks to people in the business. We can assign a financial reward. So we sort of get the top 10 cyber champions that we call them across business and make sure that it's positively, we do that positive reinforcement. These are the great people across the business doing a great job. they're a security ally. If you're not comfortable about speaking to the security team, then you can speak to this person in your work area. If you've got any doubts, they will help you. Then again, people are more likely to approach colleagues because they know them and work with them every day. So it's just almost like an extension of the security team without them being employed by security. And I think a key thing as well, it's got to come from the top. That the EMT and the senior management team have to be behind it and support it. If you've got the security team trying to do the right thing, promote all the good behaviors, and then you've got a board who are just saying, right, I want to know who's failed the phishing test, they're not getting a bonus this year. Again, it's I try and turn that around, and where I have had sort of senior management team execs who do look at that fear culture, try and change their way of thinking. So I always try and report the positive aspects. So for example, 99% of people completed their mandatory security training. That's a lot better message than, 1% of people failed, because they want to know who that 1% are so they can punish them in some way. Hey, 99% of people did it good, right? 86% of people reported a phishing email. That's great, right? So again, always try and put the positive spin, even when you're reporting, yes, we have to manage the risk. And if it was the other way around, 99% of people hadn't done the mandatory training, then I've got to explain why my security program's not working, right? But again, I think those are some of the simple ways you can change that culture into positive reinforcement, right?
Good stuff. Great to see you again, Martin. Thanks for joining us again on the show.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me across, David. Always a pleasure to speak. Thank you.
If you have a CXO story or a CXO secret to share on the show, then do get in touch. CXO Secrets at edsxevents.com. And we'll be back with more CXO Secrets in Season 4, coming to you soon, wherever you get your podcasts.